Well, this is Mark Hitchcock. I want to welcome you to the Tipping Point program. This is a program that's hosted every week by Jimmy Evans, and I appreciate the opportunity to fill in for him today on this great program that's here on endtimes.com. What I'm going to be talking about today in this program, I want to talk about something that people think a lot more about this time of year, kind of with Halloween approaching, and that is what the Bible says about hell. It's not a topic people like to think about very much, but it's a very important doctrine for us to understand as believers. In a bit after that, after this teaching, I'll go to our subscriber section where I want to talk about some current events, some things that are happening in Ukraine with U.S. troops actually right on the border of Ukraine positioned there right now. And also some interesting events happening with some of Russia's allies, Iran and Turkey, and how these really events kind of are triangulating together to really point towards the battle of Gog and Magog. Then I want to answer some questions as well. A couple of really good questions about the rapture, and one question about, why are there so many different views and why do people interpret the book of Revelation so differently? So when we go to that subscriber section, that'll be the current events and that'll be the Q&A. And if you're not a subscriber and you'd like to be, you can go to endtimes.com. You can sign up there. It's only $7 a month. And I can assure you it'll be some of the best money that you spend in a long time, as you'll really be brought into all these Q&A sessions and current event sessions that we do. So feel free to go and become a member of endtimes.com. We'd love to have you as part of the endtimes.com family. Well, as I mentioned, this week's Halloween, this next week is, and this time of year we hear people talking about things that we rarely hear them talk about at other times of the year. Our culture is becoming more and more secular and more distanced from really any kind of spiritual conversations, or especially the Bible. But this time of year with Halloween, we'll hear people talk a little bit more about the devil. We'll hear people maybe talk about demons. We'll hear more talk about hell. For most people, though, today, hell is either kind of a big joke. Maybe it's a myth. Maybe they think it's just part of some kind of medieval legends, or it's just completely misunderstood. It is interesting. A recent Pew Research poll found that 73% of Americans believe in heaven, but only 72% believe in hell. Now, I remember years ago, 90% of people in America believed in heaven. It's down to less than 3 out of 4, and the number of believe in hell is down to less than 2 out of 3. There's a headline I read in a newspaper a few years ago that probably caused a few people to choke on their coffee. It read this: it may be harder to get to hell this year. And then here's what the article said. It may be harder to get to hell this year. A bridge on the main road leading to Hell, Michigan is badly in need of repair. A project that could close the road for 3 months. Business owners in the town fear that the disruption in traffic would force some stores into bankruptcy. It'll close the whole town, complained Jim Lee, president of the Hell Chamber of Commerce. Officials acknowledge that the repair work will cause some disruption, but insist that the plans to fix the road to hell are paved with good intentions. The road has suffered great damage each time hell freezes over. Well, that's, of course, a funny article from a newspaper, but sadly, it's all too easy to get to the place that the Bible calls hell. But most people totally ignore the warnings, and they choose to simply kind of wish it all away. Unbelievers often reject the idea of hell altogether. And of course, a lot of believers ignore it. They don't want to talk about what the Bible says about hell and the afterlife. Now, when we talk about hell in the scripture, it's often, we could call it the netherworld or the underworld. And when we talk about that, we usually just employ this kind of general term, the word hell. Now, Webster's New Collegiate Dictionary defines hell like this: it's another world in which the dead continue to exist, the nether realm of the devil and the demons, in which the damned suffer everlasting punishment. So the word hell is kind of a catch-all word that we use for the abode of the devil and demons and the souls of damned human beings. But the Bible is a lot more specific and precise in its description of the netherworld than most people realize. According to the Bible, the underworld or the netherworld is divided into 4 different parts or regions or realms. And the first hints of this are found all the way back in the Old Testament. In Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 22, it says this: "For a fire kindled in my anger and burns to the lowest parts of Sheol. and consumes the earth with its yield and sets on fire the foundations of the mountains. So you notice there it refers to Sheol, which is a common Old Testament word, a Hebrew word for the grave and kind of the afterlife for many. But it calls here the lowest parts of Sheol, kind of like there's another part to Sheol. So the Old Testament word for Sheol is just kind of the general word for the place of the departed dead. I mean, in some places, it means nothing more than just the grave. But in other places, it clearly refers to the realm of departed spirits. But in the progress and the unfolding of Revelation, as God gives us more and more truth as we go through the Bible, the New Testament's a lot more specific. And so in the New Testament, there are 4 different Greek words that are translated often hell in the New Testament. And this reveals to us that there are 4 distinct parts of the underworld. And again, we know this because there's 4 different Greek words used to describe it. Now, some people will say, well, these words are just synonyms, they all just kind of mean the same thing. But as I'm going to go through and show you, these refer to 4 different parts of the underworld. Now, let me say this as I get into this a bit. The New Testament, the Bible doesn't teach purgatory. So there's not like a 5th place where purgatory is some kind of a halfway house or a stopping off spot between this world and the afterlife. There's no purgatory taught in Scripture. So I want to look together at each of these 4 words and discover their significance. The first word is the abyss. The abyss, or it's the Greek word abyssos. Sometimes it's translated the bottomless pit. So one part of the underworld is called the bottomless pit or the abyss, or sometimes it's called, you could translate it, the shaft of the abyss. The word abyssos occurs in the New Testament 9 times. 7 times it's found in the book of Revelation. Let me just read a couple verses in Revelation 9 about the abyss. It says, the 5th angel sounded, and I saw a star from heaven, which had fallen to the earth, and the key of the bottomless pit, that's the abyss, was given to him. And he opened the bottomless pit, and smoke went up out of the pit, like the smoke of a great furnace, and the sun and the air were darkened by the smoke of the pit. And then down in verse 11 of Revelation 9, they have, that is, these beings that come up out of the abyss, they're these locust-like creatures that are demonic spirits. They have as king over them the angel of the abyss. His name in Hebrew is Abaddon, and in the Greek, his name is Apollyon, which basically means just like Terminator. Now, evidently from its description in the Bible, the abyss is a place where a specific group of demons are being temporarily confined. And according to Revelation chapter 9, they're going to be let out and released during the tribulation period to torment people on the earth for a period of 5 months. Twice in Revelation 9, it says that they torment people for 5 months. The abyss is also the place where Satan will be confined during the 1,000-year reign of Christ. Revelation chapter 20 says that an angel is going to come and grab Satan and put him in the abyss where he'll be confined for 1,000 years. So the abyss is a place where some fallen angels today who go too far can be confined until they're going to be released in the end times. You remember when Jesus confronted the man with a legion of demons? Remember, Jesus is going to cast the demons out of the man, and the demons ask Jesus, they say, don't cast us into the abyss before the time. And so Jesus grants that request and casts these demonic spirits into a herd of swine. And the swine, of course, go over the cliff and are destroyed there. But what becomes clear is that these demonic spirits, they don't want Jesus to send them to the abyss because that's where some demons go that go too far and unrestrained behavior. So one of the things that tells us is even demons today have some restraint on their behavior. If they go too far, they'll be sent to the abyss. So the shaft of the abyss in Scripture is a temporary place of confinement for some demons who go too far in their rebellion against God. And the fear of being cast into the abyss acts as a kind of deterrent on the scope and the extent of their wickedness. Now, the second part of the underworld mentioned in the New Testament is Tartarus. The word Tartarus only occurs 1 time in the New Testament. It's in 2 Peter chapter 2 and verse 4. And the verse says this, "For if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell and committed them to pits of darkness reserved for judgment." Now, in our English translation, the words cast them into hell translate one Greek word. It's the word tartarosis. And you could translate it really tartarized. So these angels who sinned are sent to Tartarus or tartarized. Now in Greek mythology, Tartarus was the lowest level of the underworld. It was the bottom chamber or the basement or the lowest place of the underworld for the most heinous offenders. And if you read 2 Peter chapter 2, if you look at the flow of that passage, it's talking about judgment. And it talks about these angels who are committed to pits of darkness. Then it talks about the flood, and then it talks about Sodom and Gomorrah. So the only place really before the flood that we can see these angels who sinned is in Genesis chapter 6. This passage where the sons of God, they're these angels, come into the daughters of men, to women, and they cohabit with them and have this monstrous race of people on the earth before the time of the flood. And so that's what's being spoken of here. These angels that are sent to Tartarus are fallen angels, again, who went too far, who came and cohabited with women and created this monstrous race of people trying to corrupt the human race so that the Redeemer couldn't come from the seed of the woman. You have a parallel passage in Jude verse 7 and 8. It says, the angels who did not keep their own domain but abandoned their proper abode, God has kept in eternal bonds under darkness for the judgment of the great day. So the abyss is a place where some fallen angels are being held temporarily. They're going to be let go for 5 months during the tribulation period to torment. But these angels who sinned in Genesis 6, they've been sent to Tartarus permanently. And they'll be there permanently until the day of judgment, till they're brought before, after the great white throne judgment, when they're going to be judged and then ultimately sent into the lake of fire. So 2 different groups of parts of the underworld are for 2 groups of fallen angels. Now, the third word that's used in the New Testament for the underworld is the word Hades. That's found 10 times in the New Testament. In a couple places, Hades means nothing more than just the grave. We see that a couple times in Acts 2. So in those cases, it's kind of just similar to the Old Testament word Sheol. But the majority of uses of Hades in the New Testament reveal that it's a place where the souls of lost people are presently being confined as they await the final day of judgment. One passage I'll just read and mentions Luke 16, the parable Jesus gave of the rich man and Lazarus. And it says in Luke chapter 16, says, now it came about the poor man died and was carried away by the angels to Abraham's bosom. And the rich man died also and was buried. And in Hades, he was in torment. Now, often that's just translated hell, but it's the word Hades there. In other words, the soul or the spirit of this lost man is confined there in Hades. So I don't want to use too, kind of a familiar of an example, but you can kind of look at it this way. Hades is kind of like the county jail, where inmates await their trial date and their final sentence, and they're transferred to the penitentiary, the prison, where they're going to serve out their time. And so if Hades is kind of like the county jail where the spirits of lost people are being held now, the final word is the word Gehenna. It's the most commonly used term for the underworld or the netherworld in the New Testament. It's found 12 times in the New Testament. Interestingly, 11 of the 12 times it's on the lips of Jesus, or where Jesus describes this place. Now, when we think of hell as it's commonly used as the place kind of a final confinement for fallen angels and unbelieving humans, Gehenna is normally the place that people have in mind. So again, if Hades is the county jail, then Gehenna is kind of the maximum security penitentiary. So Gehenna is the final place of torment for Satan, demons, and all lost people for all the ages. The word Gehenna comes from the Valley of Hinnom. It's a deep valley or ravine south and west of the city of Jerusalem. It's where they would do child sacrifice. It was the garbage dump in Jesus' day that was always burning and smoldering, where the garbage was placed and burned. It's the imagery behind this is what really we get the idea of the lake of fire and brimstone, or the lake of fire, or the second death. Those are all kind of synonyms for this idea of Gehenna. Over in Mark's gospel, in Mark chapter 9, 3 times Jesus uses the word Gehenna. And finally, he describes Gehenna. He says, where their worm does not die and the fire is not quenched, and everyone will be salted with fire. So Jesus talked a lot about this final place of Gehenna. So it's the place where all of the inhabitants of the abyss and Tartarus and Hades will ultimately be cast. So if you kind of just wanted one word to describe hell or the underworld, it'd be that word Gehenna, or the lake of fire. But the way I like to use this word, I think it's accurate. We could say there's four parts to the underworld. There's abyss hell, there's Tartarus hell, there's Hades hell, and then there's Gehenna hell. And it's the ultimate abode, or the final place of confinement for fallen angels and for lost people. Now, the most important thing that we want to remember about hell, the only good news about hell is that God has provided a way for us to not go there. That's the good news. God has provided a way of escape for us through Jesus Christ. We never have to fear the lake of fire if we trust in Jesus Christ and receive him to be our Savior. And one of the things that understanding this doctrine of hell should do certainly is cause anyone who's watching, if you've never fled to Jesus Christ for refuge, flee to him and receive that pardon that he purchased for you. But another thing it should do, as we await the rapture of the church, which could happen at any moment, it ought to fuel our evangelism and our desire to see our friends and family members come to faith in Jesus Christ, so they don't end up in Hades and ultimately in Gehenna. So may God use this as a fuel in our lives, an evangelistic fuel, to share the gospel with those around us who need it so desperately. Well, we're going to stop here at this point, and we're going to go into our subscriber section, where, again, I'm going to talk about some current events happening over in Ukraine and with Turkey and Iran and some of the things happening there. And then we'll answer some questions about the rapture, and just a question about why do people interpret the book of Revelation so differently. So for the subscribers, wait just a moment, or hang with us, and we'll be right back. Well, welcome back. It's great to have you with us. And again, we appreciate so much all of you subscribers who make this ministry possible. Thank you so much. And again, tell your friends if this blesses you, and have them become subscribers as well and join with our family. I want to talk about several current events that are related to some things happening over in Ukraine, as I mentioned, in Russia. Some of you may have seen this. This is something that stunned me the other day when I saw this, and it's really, you don't hardly see it on any news outlets, and you'd think it'd be everywhere. But over in Ukraine, obviously the hostilities are rising. There's a lot of loose talk. The Russians have threatened to use tactical nuclear weapons, and of course they would use tactical nuclear weapons because these weapons don't have the kind of radioactive fallout. Obviously, Russia doesn't want to use nuclear weapons in Ukraine. If the wind's blowing, it's going to blow all this radioactive material to their country. But these tactical nuclear weapons would not do that. There's been a lot of talk of that. There's been talk of them using some kind of a dirty bomb in Ukraine as well. But there's been a major escalation, I think, there, that for the first time in 80 years, American troops are being sent over. The 101st Airborne Division is being deployed near Ukraine's border, right on the front line. Almost 5,000 U.S. troops. The 101st Airborne, one of our elite divisions, they're called the Screaming Eagles. They're over there right now in joint exercises with Romanian troops. They're on the border there with Romania and with Ukraine, carrying out military drills. And they're not just carrying out, just kind of a few military drills. They're actually simulating what the fighting would be like in Ukraine if they have to go in there and fight Russia. So this is the first time in 80 years the 101st Airborne Division has been sent to Europe. And American generals have said that these troops are ready to defend every inch of NATO soil. So all of a sudden, we're sending these 5,000 troops there, and you wonder why we're doing this right now. We're going to defend every inch of NATO soil. Is there some kind of intelligence they have that Russia's going to encroach into NATO territory? Now, this is added to the 100,000 American soldiers that are already deployed in Europe. So we have 100,000 soldiers in Europe. But the 101st Airborne's right there on the border. Now, one U.S. commander also made this comment. He says, this is not a training deployment. This is a combat deployment. That's a direct quote. So this isn't just a training deployment. It's a combat deployment. And the general also said this, we're preparing to fight Russian soldiers in Ukraine. Now, one of the things I hope is that there won't be some kind of a rash move by our current government to try to turn the elections. Sometimes people will do all kinds of dramatic things to gain support around the time of an election. So I hope this isn't political maneuvering for something like that. A group of Democrat Congress people sent a letter to President Biden asking him to try to meet with Russia to have peace. They see this as a major escalation. Now, they've just withdrawn that letter, but they see this as a major escalation. So this is an incredible thing to keep our eyes on. 5,000 American troops in combat deployment right on the border, just a few miles from the border with Ukraine. Now, a second thing in the news that's interesting, again related to Ukraine, is there was a video speech just recently by the Ukrainian President Zelensky, and he's ratcheting up his rhetoric about Israel needing to choose a side. I mean, he's basically blasting Israel in this video and slamming Israel, that Israel's kind of sitting this one out. They're kind of sitting on the sidelines. And so he says this, he says, isn't it time, talking to Israel, for your state to choose who you are with? So he's calling on Israel to choose sides. Are you with us or are you with Russia? Now, Israel has condemned the Russian invasion of Ukraine, but Israel's really not taken a side in this. And what Ukraine wants at this time is they want Israel to send air defenses to Ukraine that they desperately need. And up to this time, Israel stayed out of this. Now, one of the reasons Israel's staying out of this is, you remember that just on Israel's northern border in Syria, Russia has had a lot of troops there, as has Iran. And Israel has been hitting a lot of the Iranian assets in Syria. And in doing that, they've kind of needed Russia to kind of stay out of this and kind of stand down. So I think Israel's afraid if they come out too strongly against Russia, then Russia will begin to clamp down on what Israel's doing up in Syria. So Israel's kind of trying to play both sides here, but Zelensky's calling on Israel here to make a choice. Are they going to be with democracy or are they going to be with authoritarianism? Now, if Israel were to make some kind of a more dramatic move and send air defenses to Ukraine, you can imagine what the response in Russia would be. And of course, that would give a further motive for Russia at some point in time to attack Israel, which could, of course, be the fulfillment of the Gog-Magog invasion in Ezekiel chapter 38. So a lot happening in Ukraine, a lot happening in Israel as well, as they're being pressured to choose a side. One other thing in the news, and again, this is again related to Russia and Iran, but several months ago, I reported that in July of this year that there was a trilateral meeting of Russia and Iran and Turkey in Tehran, in Iran. You had Russian President Putin, you had Iranian President Raisi, and you have the Turkish President Erdogan. They met there in Tehran. And with all three of these nations now, Russia, Iran, and Turkey, those are the three main players in Ezekiel 38 and 39. There's 10 proper names mentioned there in Ezekiel 38, 1-6. 7 of those geographical locations are Russia, Iran, or Turkey today. And so these are the key players. And all three of these nations now, we're seeing them become more desperate. We just mentioned a couple things with Russia. They're mired in this losing effort in Ukraine. They're going to be mobilizing 300,000 more troops. Russian men are fleeing the country because they don't want to go down there and fight a useless war in Ukraine and give their life. Their economy is the 11th largest economy in the world, but is suffering. GDP in Russia right now is down. This year is going to be down somewhere between 5.5% to 9%, diminishing of gross domestic product. So Russia's getting desperate. And that's a bad thing in many ways, because the more desperate Russia gets, the more desperate measures they may take, like using tactical nuclear weapons in Ukraine. So we see Russia's desperate. They're reaching out to Iran. They've got these Iranian drones that they're using. But in Iran, we're seeing them desperate as well. Massive protests are taking place there, unlike any time since the Islamic Revolution. The biting sanctions there are hitting them hard. Their atomic program, there's reports it's been hacked. And these hackers have all kinds of information that can be used against Iran. Iran and Venezuela are strengthening economic military ties. So Iran now is desperate as well. But added to that, Turkey, who's kind of the outlier in this a little bit, Turkey's desperate as well. Turkey's inflation year over year from October of 2021 to this year, their inflation rate is 83%. So here in America right now, it's about 8.3%, maybe as much as 9%. Their inflation rate is 10 times what it is here in the United States. Think about this. For basic consumer goods, inflation in Turkey is up 177%. Fruit is up 230%. Dairy products and eggs up 150%. So, just think about what that would do. Here in America, with it up 8 or 9%, I just saw this week that 62% of people in America are living paycheck to paycheck. Think about what this is doing over in Turkey. So you've got three nations here, the three nations of the Gog-Magog coalition, Russia, Iran, and Turkey, in really desperate situations. And desperation can drive people to close ranks. And it can drive people to do things they wouldn't otherwise do and take rash measures. One other interesting development is Turkey has just entered into negotiations with Russia to become the natural gas hub for Russia. So natural gas wouldn't go through Ukraine. It comes through the Black Sea to Turkey, and then Turkey would then supply Europe. So it's a way for Russia to get this illicit gas that they're not supposed to be selling, get it to Turkey, and then they can get it over to Europe. So Europe would get its gas supply from this Turkstream Turkish pipeline, which is a hub in Turkey. So it would bypass what's happening in Ukraine. So all of these things are happening with these Gog coalition nations, Russia, Iran, and Turkey. Their alliance is growing closer together. And these desperate measures, I think, moving them to become more desperate. And as they become more desperate in that way, they become more dangerous. Let's move now into these questions. Again, some great questions y'all always send in. Keep them coming. We love to answer these questions. Here's a good one. It says, one of the 10 commandments is do not kill. So let me just pause there for a moment and say, by the way, that the 10 commandments, if you want to look them up, it's something that every believer ought to know, the 10 commandments. The 10 commandments are found in two places in the Old Testament, Exodus chapter 20 and Deuteronomy chapter 5. So those are the two places where the 10 commandments, often called the Decalogue, are where it's found. So it says one of the 10 commandments is do not kill. But God seems to have blessed America's past killing of evil in the world, terrorists, Nazis, etc. And God likely approves Israel's lethal defense of themselves against the Iranians. God can't contradict himself, so can you help us understand? Does this relate in any way to where Jesus says, depart from me, you who break God's laws, which that's a reference to Matthew chapter 7 and verse 23. Well, just at the outset here, to make it really clear, the sixth commandment really should read, you shall not murder. It's not you shall not kill. But in fact, a lot of modern translations translate the word that way, you shall not murder. Because we know that the Bible supports the idea of self-defense. Back in the book of Exodus, chapter 22, verses 2 and 3, you're able to protect your own property or your own life. So the Bible supports protecting your own life or your family, even to take someone else's life. The Bible, I believe, clearly supports capital punishment. All the way back in Genesis chapter 9, God said, whoever shed man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed. Over in Romans chapter 13, it talks there about government. It says, does the government bear the sword for nothing? Well, obviously the purpose of a sword was to execute. So I think the Bible clearly supports capital punishment. In fact, in ancient Jewish teaching, there were 18 different crimes that you could receive capital punishment for. And of course, the law is given by God. Also, the Bible allows the taking of life in just war. Now, I say just war because not all wars are just. Some wars are unjust. They're just people trying to get territory. They're greedy. That's vengeance. But there are just wars when you're attacked, or to take out an aggressor, where God allows warfare. In fact, God even told the Jewish people at different times to go attack other nations and to kill them, to defend themselves and to defend their territory. So the sixth commandment is you shall not murder. Now that has a lot of implications for today, where we see all the lawlessness in our culture today. It's been described, our world today, as the age of rage. We see an angry, violent culture, just a callous disregard for human life. A life has become cheap and easily disposable. And one of the tragic consequences of that, of course, we see is abortion in our country today. So when you read the sixth commandment, don't read it, thou shalt not kill, but it's thou shalt not murder. It's not to murder. That's what that's talking about. So we need to be clear about that. Another question: when the rapture does take place, will the rods and screws that hold my spine straight due to scoliosis since the age of 13 be left behind? I'm writing a message to my non-believing family members that the hardware could be left behind when I leave this planet. This will be more proof that I went to live with Jesus for eternity. It's an interesting question. We don't really know the answer to that for sure. We do know when the rapture takes place, that those who've died, their bodies are going to be resurrected. They're going to be resurrected in immortal, imperishable, incorruptible body, going to be caught up to meet the Lord in the air. And those of us who are alive, the Bible says, are going to be caught up together with him in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. Now, if you've read the Left Behind books written by Tim LaHaye and Jerry Jenkins years ago, in those books, when the rapture takes place, people's clothes are left behind, like on the airplane. So there's, someone, their body's gone. It's like it just kind of evacuates out of the clothes, and the eyeglasses are still lying there. I do remember Tim LaHaye, who was a friend of mine, saying one time at a conference I was at that some people, when the rapture takes place, there's going to be more left than is going to be taken. Again, talking about, body parts and maybe, hips that have been placed or knees or things that are prosthetic. So we don't really know. It would make sense to me that some things will be left behind. We're not going to need clothes to take to heaven. You're certainly not going to need the screws or prosthetic devices in your body to go to heaven. And again, that could be left behind as kind of a dramatic picture to people of what's really taken place. I've often wondered myself, when the rapture takes place, those who've died, will the tombs burst open? Now, we know they don't have to burst open because it's going to be a spiritual body that can go right through the ground. But we do know in Matthew 27, when Jesus, after he was resurrected in Jerusalem, it says the tombs burst open. Some people came out and walked around the city of Jerusalem. And Jesus' tomb obviously was open to let people in. So if these things are left behind, that'll be just it'll be dramatic. It'll be a powerful picture to people of what's taken place, that people have simply disappeared. So we don't know for sure, but I think if you write that in there, I don't think that would be an incorrect thing for you to place there. One final question. This is a question about interpreting the Bible. And a couple weeks ago, I wrote an article you might want to go back and look at about interpreting the Bible literally and interpreting Bible prophecy literally. And this question relates to that. It says, why do so many readers understand Revelation differently? Talking about the book of Revelation. If it's so important for us to read and understand, why wouldn't God make it more clear? Now, initially, what I would say about this is right at the very beginning of the book of Revelation, right when you start reading the book, it says, the revelation of Jesus Christ. That's the title of this book. It's the revelation of Jesus Christ. And the word revelation there is the Greek word apocalypsis. We get our word apocalypse from that. And apocalypsis means to unveil something or to take the cover off. So right there, we have a signal from God that he wants us to understand the book of Revelation. It's not called the hiding or the disclosing of Jesus Christ. It's the unveiling or the uncovering. So God at the outset is telling us he wants us to understand this book. The 2 verses later in Revelation chapter 1, verse 3, this is the only book of the Bible, the book of Revelation. It's the only book to have a blessing associated with it. It says, blessed are those who read the words of this prophecy. Those who understand it, and those who heed the things written herein. So the book of Revelation is often called the blessing book There's a blessing to read it, and a blessing to understand it, and a blessing to do and obey the things that are written in the book. So if God calls this book an unveiling, and he wants to bless people who read it and understand it and who obey it, then we must be able to understand it and obey it. I mean, it's just a simple statement. So you say, well, why do people have so many different opinions about it and not understand it? Well, I think the answer to that really is fairly simple. The problem is with the interpreters. It's with pastors, it's with teachers who insist upon interpreting the Bible in any manner other than in a literal manner. They want to interpret it figuratively, allegorically. I'll just give you one example. People read through the book of Revelation and they don't take the numbers literally. The number 54 the number 7 is used 54 times in the book of Revelation. Right at the beginning of the book, Jesus is in the middle of 7 lampstands. And he tells us those lampstands are 7 churches. So we have a key right there that the numbers in the book are literal. Those 7 lampstands are 7 churches. But yet so many people, then they leave the first chapter and they'll take the 1,000 years in Revelation 20 and they'll say, well, that's symbolic just of this entire age. The 1,000 years there is literal. It's repeated 6 different times. So if we don't take the book of Revelation literally and understand what it's saying, that's where we get all these different interpretations that people have. And in Revelation 1:19, the Apostle John, there writing this book, gives the divine outline. In fact, he's writing down what Jesus tells him. He gives the divine outline for the book. And he's told by Jesus, John, write the things you've seen, the things which are, and the things that will be after these things. Well, the things he's just seen is Revelation chapter 1, which is a vision of the radiant resurrected Christ. Then he says, write the things that are. That's chapters 2 and 3, the letters to the 7 churches of Asia there in the western part of modern day Turkey. And then he says, write the things that will be after these things. Well, Revelation 4-22 is the after these things. So in Revelation 1, you have the Christ. Revelation 2 and 3, you have the churches. In Revelation 4-22, you have the consummation. And if you read Revelation 4-22, you have basically the tribulation period that's coming, the 7-year period of time, 3 waves of judgment, the seals, the trumpets, the bowls. Chapter 19, you have Christ's second coming to earth. Chapter 20, you have the millennial kingdom, his 1,000-year reign, and a great white throne judgment at the end. And then in Revelation 21 and 22, you have heaven. You have the new heaven and the new earth. So certainly we may disagree about small details within that, but if we take the book of Revelation in the literal, normal understanding, you're going to come to that interpretation of the book. And it's tragic to me that so many people today shy away from the book. They don't understand it. Some don't even have a desire to understand it, but many twist it and make it so hard and so difficult to understand when God says, look, this is the apocalypsis. I want you to understand it. I want you to read it. I want you to hear it. I want you to do the things that are written here. And when you do that, you'll get a blessing. So read the book of Revelation and take it what it says at face value, and God will bless you richly for that. Well, thank you as always again so much for taking time to join us. God bless you, and we'll see you next week.